This video is one which I intended on releasing, well, early in the year. Like the date suggests, I did this in January, and it was part of the project that I am currently working on and developing at a more rapid pace at the moment, which I'm recording this on the 16th of July 2023. This was a project which I did with, I started off with staining a mixed media sketchbook with a tea bag and water, and that was my initial thought, is to try and get some tone down on the paper first, and then from that I can start to build up layers and try to create some kind of environment and atmosphere which I thought would be interesting and important for this kind of project. Now, doing the tea part was a little bit tricky, and it took a bit of, squeezing the tea bag, adding a bit more water, using the paintbrush and pushing it around a little bit, dabbing it with some blue roll. And then after that, I started to bring out pots of pigments that I'd collected from different life drawing sessions, where I would draw with either pastels or soft pastels, or I have some toned charcoal blocks as well as graphite blocks, and that dust falls down into the tray below the presentation pad that I use, and I then tip that onto its side. In fact, I think it may have even been on an easel, because I can see on this video, later on in the video, you can see that again, I'm just going to call it the tray for now, which holds the easel, which you clip onto the frame, and it holds the easel like a little carriage. That is where the pigment fell and collected, and I would tip that into yogurt pots. And that's what I'm tipping now onto the paper that has been, has tea on it that's still wet at the moment. So that's what I'm using. And it does create an interesting blend that I do think is already becoming something which I can use the paintbrush to push around and make something start to happen on the page. And it may just look messy and abstract, but that is what I'm pushing for, really. I practice a lot of figurative and representational artwork, so it's important for me to now go outside of that experience and start to create something which reflects some of the more organic shapes and textures that I encounter when I walk in the countryside and visit farmlands with my friend. And that's something which is driving this piece specifically, is a need to create something that's slightly outside of my normal body of work. Once I've added the pigment to the paper, I then rip off another piece of blue roll, and I start to wipe and dab and create a bit more of an interesting texture and tone on the page than what I had when it was just sat there soaking up the water. I wanted it to have something that created this different patches and different thicknesses of opacity and transparency, and that's something which can only be achieved through layering. It's almost the same as when I consider watercolor painting, but through this method it's going to continually be the challenge of removing any guidance that my hand wants to create in order to make something look like a shape or a form that I'm more familiar with. So it was a practice in subtracting my own creative influence from the process, and that can be quite liberating. I did start to enjoy just the different elements and how they interacted with one another. And if I were to just focus on the surface as opposed to the subject, it would start to yield more results that I was hoping to achieve than if I were to start to apply drawing skills at this stage. And I think you can see here it's very earthy tones. It's a lot of warmer toned colours like oranges and browns, and even the black isn't a very cool black. And it's nice. It gives me that sort of rusty and organic feel of nature, which I say rusty, it's because obviously on farmlands that I'm visiting, you see rusty old machinery, which to me has a very beautiful look to it. That's what I wanted to try to harness in this piece, and that is why I'm influenced by that colour. Now at some point here, once I get this page into the condition that I'm happy with, I have a session with it that wasn't recorded. And basically in this session I use a fairly large set of soft pastels and start to draw on top of this nicely toned paper a shape, the shape which is going to be the design that I work around for the remainder. So you can see here the soft pastels, and that is the drawing which I'm really not happy with. So what I intend to do is to do another layer on top of this again, because there's no limit as to what you can start to push forth into once you reach this point. And I'm not even sure what the piece of farming machinery was that the photo reference was from. I need to ask a farmer that I know if he can help with that. I'm sure he can. It may even be on his farmland, but it was one of the first references that I think I was sent. It possibly was the first, and it had these lovely almost backwards S shapes. That was something which I had to start to push out a little bit more and create this a kind of flatness on top, because if I had this almost opaque tonal hue to flatten a lot of the surface, then the texture that I've built up beneath will be a layer that you can then see, and it will give the impression of rust and of a weathered environment. Once I'd got enough of the soft pastel down using the blue and pushing the green that was already there, I started to use a toothpick. It may seem a little unusual, but I just needed something with a point, because I knew that I had layers beneath the soft pastel that I was applying that I could then start to slightly reveal by pushing away and scoring into this layer of soft pastel. There are many things that you can do beyond this point, but for me it was important to reach this stage and to get to a point where it became more experimental. This now gives it a level of, I suppose it's kind of a more dynamic kind of form, I suppose, or aesthetic, I should say, than what I had achieved with the flatness of the pastel. By this I just mean that the scratches, the scored lines through the pastel are almost like movement or some kind of flow that occurs on top of these layers. There's the rusty browns and oranges beneath, the pastel on top, and the scratches and lines scored through that on top again. It just became a process which I think was a necessary element in order to reach a stage which I think yielded a certain result. Now this is a messy process, and it is something which it just collects up in dust on the surface. And once it had, I got out the little shelf, the tray that you clip onto an easel, and once I had all the dust collected to one side, I picked up the pad and scooped all of the dust onto the tray and then put that into another yogurt pot. I am, in one sense, frugal, but in another sense, not wasteful. I don't know if you equate those two things. Frugal can just mean wanting to save money, whereas I actually think that there are certain forms of waste that can be avoided, especially if this can be still used time and time again, and pigment is always something which can be just tipped again on top of another piece. So it's all tipped in, and the piece is now in a new condition where it doesn't have piles of pigment on top, and I'm pretty happy with how it looks. It's harder to see here, but you'll be able to see it in just a moment. It certainly has transformed from several different states, and I think has become quite an interesting image. I'm going to try to create a series of these for the exhibition. Whether they will be successful and make it into the exhibit, into the exhibition itself, I'm not sure, but this is one of several ideas that I'm going to try to explore as part of this observance and appreciation of the environment and of the culture that we're trying to celebrate and observe and study and interact with. So this is how I've turned my illustrative background of drawing into a more contemporary fine art realm, which is suitable for different exhibiting spaces that would otherwise possibly consider my work to be unsuitable for their audience, which may seem unfair, but is just a way of ensuring that their space and their environment is curating a consistent theme of practitioners, which I appreciate. And I'm trying to have different outlets for my creativity, and one of which is this fine art practice. So that was the process that I went through for this image. I hope you enjoyed it. It's something which I'm going to repeat, so you may see some more quite soon. Thanks for watching.